Our next speaker is Ali Abunimah. Ali Abunimah is author of One Country, A Bold Proposal to End the Israeli-Palestinian Impasse. He was a co-founder of the online publication, the Electronic Intifada, and a policy advisor with Al-Shabaka. Ali, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Radhika. My thanks to the International Manifesto Group for inviting me to this important discussion alongside such distinguished analysts. Some of my analysis will overlap very strongly with what we just heard from Mazda, but I hope to also elaborate on some different points as well. After returning to power at the head of an ultra-far-right coalition in December, Benjamin Netanyahu hoped quickly to resume Tel Aviv's march towards full normalization with Arab regimes. The Israeli leader was still flying high from the so-called Abraham Accords, brokered under the Trump administration between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, and other countries as well, such as Oman, were rumored to be getting involved. But the major unfinished business was a deal with Saudi Arabia. Although Riyadh has made some very major moves to cozy up to Tel Aviv, the kingdom remains officially outside the Abraham Accords. Netanyahu claimed after returning to power that establishing formal ties with the Saudis would, quote, be a quantum leap that would effectively end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I presume by isolating and weakening the Palestinians. It would also solidify the American-led axis against Iran, long the arch-enemy of the regimes in Tel Aviv and Riyadh. The Biden administration in recent months intensified its efforts to broker such a deal, but without success. The exorbitant demands put forward by the Saudis, including US security guarantees, more arms sales, and assistance with the civilian nuclear program, appeared designed to be rejected and thus to provide Riyadh with a way out of formally embracing Israel. For the foreseeable future, therefore, the Saudis have had a change of heart about turning their long engagement with Israel into a marriage. Meanwhile, in March, there was a diplomatic earthquake. Rather than sign up formally to Israel's obsessive crusade against Iran, the Saudis decided instead to make their peace with Tehran. Even worse, from the Israeli and, more importantly, the American perspective, the historic rapprochement was brokered by China, whose growing power and confidence is setting alarm bells ringing among the imperial managers in Washington. China had never before brokered such a major breakthrough in the region, and it is now offering even to facilitate peace talks between the Israelis and Palestinians. Former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett described the Iran-Saudi rapprochement as, quote, a grave and dangerous development for Israel and a significant diplomatic victory for Iran, end quote. It is indeed not only a major setback for Israel and a victory for Iran, but a victory for the people of the whole region, whose lives have been overturned for decades by US-fueled wars, sanctions, and chaos. The Saudi move towards independent action and its implications for the United States and Israel, as well as for the Palestinians, can really only be understood in the context of the current shift towards a multipolar world, specifically the rise of China, its deepening partnership with Russia, and the simultaneous erosion of American power. The latter seems to be accelerating due to Washington's ill-advised proxy war against Russia, which Ukraine has no chance of winning. The hubris with which American and European elites embraced that war, which they had been stoking for years since the coup instigated by the United States in Ukraine in 2014. The hubris has been dashed against the rocks of reality, even if they cannot yet admit it. For all its massive military spending, it is apparent that the US and the Europeans do not have the industrial and military resources to sustain Ukraine against Russia in a grueling, old-fashioned land war. The EU and US shock and awe sanctions that in President Joe Biden's words would turn the ruble into rubble and sink the Russian economy have not only failed, but are backfiring on their authors. Countries around the world are accelerating de-dollarization, trading in their own currencies in order to shield themselves from Washington's much-used sanctions weapon. All of this is a far cry from where the United States stood at the end of the Cold War, an unrivaled military, diplomatic, and economic colossus. No other country could have assembled a 500,000-strong army and deployed it halfway around the world as the United States did in 1990 and 91 to liberate Kuwait from Iraqi occupation. That new world order of American dominance and endless expansion was supposed to last forever, but it hasn't worked out that way. The criminal US invasion of Iraq in 2003 led to no lasting US influence and only ended up strengthening Iran. And it is now Chinese companies, not US corporations, which are rebuilding Iraq. Meanwhile, the Obama administration's regime change war in Libya overthrew Muammar al-Gaddafi and left that country a lawless failed state and a hub for human trafficking. Perhaps the most dramatic illustration of American imperial decline was the US defeat and humiliating withdrawal from Afghanistan in August of 2021 after 20 years of occupation. Already, the Saudi-Iranian reconciliation has unlocked the path to ending the US-backed war in Yemen and the proxy war in Syria after more than a decade of devastation due to the US-led regime change effort against Damascus using Al-Qaeda-affiliated proxies. Given all this, one can hardly blame the Saudis for looking for a way out of their total dependence on Washington, a relationship that began in 1945. Normalization with Israel on Washington and Tel Aviv's terms only ever made sense in a context where the Saudis had to do whatever it took to please their American patrons. And if that meant embracing the Zionists, then so be it. In the emerging multipolar world, the Saudis have options and clearly intend to pursue them. From their perspective, Washington is 7,000 miles away from Riyadh. And the United States is an increasingly mercurial and unreliable partner or ally or master, whatever you might want to call it. You just have to look at the circus that is US national politics today. After the debacles in Ukraine and Afghanistan, not to mention Vietnam and so many other places since World War II, which regime would now bet on Washington coming to its rescue in its hour of need? The Saudi interest in so-called peace with Israel peaked when Riyadh felt most vulnerable and needed to shore up its relationship with the US. Now that the kingdom, like other countries, is pursuing a multipolar strategy, what is the rush to embrace Israel? Iran, meanwhile, will always be next door, and Saudi Arabia sits on the same Eurasian continent as Russia and China. Already, China is Saudi Arabia's top trading partner. The Saudis seem to be aware that not just their regime's security, but their prosperity and future can only be guaranteed by good relations with those whom they live near and with whom they trade. Other countries are undoubtedly coming to similar conclusions. Whatever we may feel about the nature of its regime, and indeed I agree with Mazda that it is one of the most reactionary regimes in the world, Saudi Arabia with its vast oil wealth, will always have something to offer other countries, and therefore options and leverage in a multipolar world. As for Israel, what can it offer the world? Its overhyped high-tech may be useful to some regimes, but they are hardly unique. Israel has a tiny, uncompetitive manufacturing industry and is not a major energy producer. It is moreover suffering a major brain drain as the best and the brightest pull out their second passports and jump ship. Israel, to be frank, is a toxic settler colonial project of the West that is only becoming more horrifying, burdensome, and extreme with each passing year. Israel has little prospect of finding another sponsor as devoted and generous as the United States, and that spells trouble for Tel Aviv. As US power continues to recede regionally and globally, so will Israel's. At the same time, as the US and Israel weaken, we have seen the axis of resistance grow in strength and confidence, and this is already having a major impact in Palestine. Israel recognizes the growing unity and capabilities of the resistance it faces on all sides, and it has no answer. Its defense minister, Yoav Gallant, said this publicly in April. Quote, "This is the end of the era of limited conflicts," Gallant said. "We are facing a new security era in which there may be a real threat to all arenas at the same time." For Tel Aviv, the biggest threat is Hezbollah, which humiliated the Israeli army when it invaded Lebanon in 2006. Hezbollah, like Palestinian armed resistance groups, is supported by an increasingly confident and technologically capable Iran. This means that even as Israel becomes more fanatical and extreme, its room to maneuver is diminishing. As the Palestinian people once again become the clear majority between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, Israel faces the same fate as apartheid South Africa. No doubt, Israel's military might means it can kill and destroy, but it can no longer dictate political terms to anyone, not to Iran, not to Lebanon, not to the Saudis, and not even to the Palestinian resistance groups in tiny, isolated Gaza, who showed once again earlier this month that they are willing to fight in defense of the Palestinian people everywhere, especially in Jerusalem. It is clear that the liberation of Palestine cannot take place under the shadow of Euro-American imperialism. The West will do all it can for as long as it can to shore up its apartheid settler colony. But as I've argued in this brief survey, the world is changing, power is shifting, and US imperialism is in retreat. Those facts alone do not guarantee any specific future or outcome, especially as Mazda correctly noted that the regimes in the region continue to be reactionary regimes. But these changes open up great possibilities for a more equal, just, and prosperous world based on partnership and cooperation if we seize them. Even in Palestine, I believe, we can already see on the horizon the first glimmers of the dawn of liberation. Thank you.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.